When you hear vitamin K, what comes to mind? Blood clotting? Warfarin? Leafy vegetables? Now here's the real question. What if vitamin K is also part of the bone and artery story that people keep trying to pin only on vitamin D? And most of us are only hearing half the story. Vitamin K often gets reduced into a single idea, clotting vitamin, end of story. But it's more interesting than that. It isn't one thing, and it didn't stay in one role. So today, I want to give you a more complete picture. What is vitamin K? Why there's K1 and K2? What's the grounded information and what gets exaggerated and what you can do with this without turning it into another supplement obsession? Before we begin, a quick note. Helpful health information is not always the loudest content online. Often the most useful advice is balanced, honest, about both benefits and limits. If you value that kind of no hype medical discussion, please support this channel with a like, comment, or share. It helps more thoughtful viewers like yourself find this channel. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. So now back to vitamin K. Vitamin K got its name from coagulation. The original discovery story is simple. Certain diets led to bleeding problems, and scientists realized that there's a fat soluble factor needed for normal clotting. That's why vitamin K entered medicine through a very serious problem. When clotting fails, bleeding matters. It was never a wellness trend at its start. It was practical biology with real consequences. But then we learned something important. Vitamin K isn't a single vitamin. It's a family, like vitamin B complex. There's K1 and there's K2, and that's where a lot of modern confusion begins. K1, also called phyloquinone, is the form most people get from food, especially leafy green vegetables. It tends to be taken up by the liver, and the liver is where the classic clotting proteins are made. That's why K1 is the form most tightly associated with clotting in everyday medical thinking. So when people say greens have vitamin K, they are usually talking about vitamin K1. Then you have K2. It shares the same vitamin K core, the quinone, but it behaves a bit differently in the body. And it isn't one thing either. It's a group of forms called menaquinones. Here's the practical point. K2 is the form that gets talked about more in tissues outside the liver, especially in the bone and in blood vessels. That's why many people simplify it as K1 is clotting and K2 is bones and arteries. That shortcut is useful as long as you remember it is not a brick wall. Both are parts of vitamin K and both support vitamin K's underlying job. And what is the underlying job, you ask? Vitamin K helps switch on certain proteins so that they can function. It's not building the whole system. It's more like turning on the tools. In the liver, that includes clotting proteins. Outside the liver, there are other vitamin K dependent proteins involved in the bone and vascular biology, which is where the modern vitamin K2 story comes from. Now let's talk about the part that scares people and often gets handled badly, warfarin and leafy greens. If you're on warfarin, you have probably heard some version of avoid greens. And that advice is often taken too seriously. The calmer understanding is this. Warfarin doesn't mean no greens. It means be predictable with your greens. So your warfarin baseline is adjusted to your usual vitamin K pattern. Problems arise when the intake swings wildly. If you normally eat greens most days, keep doing that. If you rarely eat greens, don't suddenly eat a lot. Don't switch to large daily salads without telling your doctor or checking your INR. And don't do the opposite either. Don't go from daily greens to none at all and expect that your INR will stay steady. The aim is consistency, not fear. Warfarin isn't scared of leafy greens. Warfarin is sensitive to surprises. That warfarin and greens point matters because it reveals a bigger theme in medicine. The right strategy is almost always steadiness, not elimination. Now back to K2 and why it became such a talked about vitamin. K2 matters because it sits in an important intersection: bones, aging, arteries, and calcium. Once researchers realized vitamin K is involved in activating proteins linked to bone biology and vascular biology, the obvious question followed. If vitamin D helps with calcium absorption, could vitamin K also influence where calcium ends up over decades of life? That's the real scientific question underneath the headlines. It's not magic, it's biology, then careful testing. And this is where vitamin E lessons is useful. The theory can be plausible and still not translate into a big, clear benefit for most people. So the balanced way is to hold K2 in this. It is genuinely interesting, it has real biology behind it, and research continues. But it has been marketed with a level of certainty that goes beyond where evidence comfortably sits for the average person. So, where are we in vitamin K2 right now? A sensible summary is there are signals that K2 may matter for bone related outcomes in some settings, and there is ongoing research interest in vascular calcification. But the strongest internet claims are often ahead of what large outcome trials are guaranteed. That doesn't mean K2 is useless or made up. It means that the story is still developing and it needs proportion. So, what do you do with this in real life? First, stay food first. Yes, K1 is strongly associated with leafy greens, and vitamin K intake overall comes from a broader diet than just greens. Many people will cover their bases through a variety diet that includes green and everyday foods. K2 intake is more variable and depends on dietary patterns, including some animal foods and fermented foods, which is one reason supplements became popular. But variable does not automatically mean deficient. It just means we should be careful before turning an interesting hypothesis into a pill routine. Second, be sensible about blood thinners. If you're on warfarin, consistency is the main message. If you're on another anticoagulant, vitamin K doesn't interact in the same direct way as it does with warfarin, but it still doesn't mean you should self-prescribe high-dose K2 supplements without advice. The aim is not fear, the aim is context. Third, remember the theme of this whole vitamin series from A, B, C, D, E, and now K. Vitamins are often sold as single ingredient solutions to complex multi-factor problems: bones, aging, arteries, fatigue. Reality is rarely that simplistic. The best long term health strategies usually look boring: real food, steady habits, evidence based medication when needed, and targeted supplements only when there's a clear reason. So here's the take home: vitamin K is not just clotting, but clotting is still its core story. K1 anchors the classic narrative and comes largely from greens, leafy greens. K2 sits in the bone and artery story with some emerging signs and a lot of overselling. And if you take one practical message to the bank today, it's this: if you are on warfarin, don't fear greens, be consistent. In the next episode, we'll connect vitamin K back to vitamin D and calcium without turning it into a simplistic story. Once you see how these nutrients interact, it becomes much harder for hype to hook you.